Good afternoon, everyone. As you know, welcome to this annual update on user commands and SALT. The SALT updates don't come at the same frequency as the APL interpreter. There's a new version of the APL interpreter each year. SALT and user commands come at a different frequency, and they come typically once every few months when we have a new version ready. This year is no different. There have been the usual changes. We've had some new user commands, some old that have been removed, and some that have been modified. Last year we had some very big changes. We had a whole restructuring of the user commands. This year there hasn't been that big. So it's much smaller this time. At the beginning of the year, we had the chance to get Adám on board. Adám is a very good APL programmer. So the first task was assigned to him is to write a user command, of which he's going to talk to you about in a moment. And in the process of doing so, he also went over the code and made some changes to SALT and the user commands themselves. So since he's been doing most of the work this year on this, what I'm going to let him do is talk to you about all the changes that have happened in much more details.
Yeah, so as Dan mentioned, changes happen to SALT and to the user commands, and then not necessarily released together with the release of Dialog. So there's a special user command called update that, if you have an internet connection, you can type that in, and it will safely update your user commands according to which version of APL you're running. It will ask you first before it overwrites anything. Okay, as Dan also said, as I started looking at the user commands, I found that a lot of them could need some care and love, and there are a interesting mix of styles and syntax and messages from the various ones, and so I started a large project that's mostly done, not completely, but still working on it, of standardizing, especially the help text. Some of them were obscure, and the different levels of user command help, right bracket, 1 question mark, 2 question marks, 3 question marks, 4 question marks, are now mostly and will soon be all standardized. So it always, the same number of question marks always means the same thing for every user command, with a little exception. Some user commands are very trivial, so don't have as many levels. The help content also now uses the same style for almost all, and will soon be all user commands. And something that I found was very annoying, I personally like to change my font size a lot when I work. Sometimes I like to have big letters, and sometimes I want to see a lot on the screen. And until now, it was up to the person implementing a user command to choose a width of his lines, and it would just be that. If you had space for more, you would have a lot of white space on the right. If you had too big large letters on the screen, it would wrap at a random point in the line in the middle of a word onto the next line. So user commands now output their help text with a adjustment for the current print width. So it also means if you want the text out in a certain width, you can set quad PW, and then you can ask for the help and then get it out adjusted to that width. Which leads us to a couple of new user commands, besides for the one I was tasked with making. In order to make it as easy as possible for me to have a standard output from all the user commands, I made first one and then a simplified user command, which you can see under output. You have format and layout. So actually all the user commands use the layout user command in order to output their help texts, and the effect is actually that which you see here, that it automatically adjusts hanging paragraphs and breaks at the right point in the lines, and it does this based on white space that's already there. So it tries to make sense out of what's already there. Format is for those that want more control over how things get output to the screen. You can add various parameters to numbers and percentages of the screen width for margins and indents and so on. Then there's another new user command which comes to help when you probably have stumbled upon the case that you have some code and it does some output to the session and you don't know where did that output come from, right? You're busy with something else, you go back to the session, there's all kinds of things that were dumped into the session. I want to find who's the culprit. So we have a user command called find output. Oh. Yeah. That is the one piece that's missing, is that the last line is not under user command control, so that one doesn't wrap correctly. So find output is very simple. Usually if you have quad gets, then it's not a problem to find it. You can just search for the text string, but all the lines that are not like that, it will look exactly like the example here. Maybe we should move the window. So better. It finds simply lines that output things and puts a little label on them to show when the output is coming out. And then that I remember when Morten told me, asked me if I wanted to be a hero overnight. Classic problem. Dialog releases a new version, and all those APLers who want things exactly their way have, of course, used the last year to set all kinds of settings for the IDE. And you get a new version, and bang, you're back to the defaults, and it's really annoying. You have all the edit windows and sizes and colors, and everything is messed up. And you spend the next week to fiddle with that, and the following months to do the last couple of changes. So we now have a new user command, which is called CopyReg, and here you can see how it folds the text correctly to the screen width, despite the big font size. It does basically two things for you automatically, and this was no simple task to make this work. There was a reason it wasn't there before, which is a simple functionality you can take from any version. Doesn't have to be the currently running one. Save the whole registry tree, Windows registry tree, into a registry file. This is very useful because if you want to go into the registry, despite the warnings, and fiddle with the settings, and you end up messing up something, you give a double click on that registry file, and everything's back to what it was. So that's an assurance. And then, of course, it does this fancy thing of moving settings from between versions. It can take any of the latest versions and move settings back and forth. It has a default set of safe settings that can be moved, but you can also specify include lists, exclude lists. You want your specific color scheme moved over, it can be done. So that, for example, would be something that we do not copy over by default, because we cannot know if you made a change to a default scheme or if there's an update from Dialog that you want instead, that you can specify very easily. You can take a couple of examples of that. You can, however you like to specify version numbers, it can handle basically anything, and it just takes lists of paths in the registry that you want to include and exclude, but include and exclude in front, and then it takes care of some special cases. Usually, if you move settings between versions, you do not want any registry setting that contains an absolute path on the hard disk, because you probably have a different installed folder for a different version, and you want those files referenced instead. Of course, as always, a warning: don't fiddle with the registry if you don't know what you're doing. But at least now it's a little bit more safe. Then we have a couple of changes to names of user commands with some increased functionality. There used to be bracket U version, which was specific to the current version of the user command system, but now it also reports the version numbers for everything else, basically, and so it's appropriately called version. Then there's already for a while been right bracket profile, which is a very good performance monitor, and already long overdue that we have to remove. They were first disabled, now removed, two user commands, APLMon and bracket monitor. Not in use anymore, shouldn't be used anymore. We're broken anyway, somewhat. There has been some structural changes to the groups of user commands. Now, usually you don't have to type in the groups, only if there are conflicting names. We want to keep that to a minimum. But we can actually provide some information with the group names, whereas before we had a miscellaneous group that didn't really say much. I've tried to make a somewhat more sensible one. So we have we have a group called calc for things that are pure math. And we have some tools that are purely tool-based tools for while you're doing the programming. And then there are some user commands that are specific to Windows. We can't have it otherwise. And they're now, instead of having to try it out, we now have a group that's called MSWin. Those are the user commands that are just for Windows, like changing captions, the demo, the script demo, which uses the menu system, and file associations, of course, is all Windows, GUI, and then there used to be that open was available on non-Windows. However, it didn't make much sense because it couldn't really do anything. Under Windows, it actually has meaning of opening a specific file in a specific application, or just launching anything. So that is a brief overview of the changes, and of course it's still in progress. And then caption. Yeah. Well, the captions is of course Windows specific and has been updated with the syntax. Some of the syntax for making settings were not consistent before, and now they're consistent. And every user command that sets some kind of setting, whether it's the window caption or it's the actual settings, right bracket settings, they all now return the previous value that were there before. It makes it easy to, of course, capture the value and reset it should you want to do that automatically. And a little note, because it's really about Salt also. As we work more and more with Salt files, and of course user commands is the extreme of that, then I would like to see more integration of Salt files into the actual workflow. And I quickly stumbled upon the problem that I'm looking for a specific Salt file in a folder in Windows, and I want to know more than just the file name. So I found out how to make a registry setting so that Windows now recognizes Salt files as text files, and that means that if we open a folder that contains Salt files, then we can get a preview right there in Explorer. And in fact, we can select and copy and paste right from there. No need to open anything in any application for that. And it is now a default part of the Dialog install. So if you download the latest, then you'll get this functionality automatically upon install also. And I hope to in the future also help with adding more of these kind of functionalities, making it even easier to work with Salt files, although a work in progress. Oh, well, it's not new, but okay. Oh, it wasn't. I didn't even know it was new. When I came, it was already there. I didn't put it in. It's a user command to change the the caption of whatever window you want. So you can change the editor. Again, lots of fun to play around with, and also planning on using that in the future to be more informative, to actually tell you what you're in the middle of doing. It can be used in many ways. And of course, everything, at least the most commonly used user commands have proper help. This now should be easier to read. So there's actually on the Windows a cute little user command. It's a self-referential user command. It helps you to get started making user commands.
Kind of a wizard.
What?
Kind of a wizard.
Yeah. It's a wizard, and it goes all the way from right here describing it, and all the way to saving the file. The only things that you need to add to that is to add to the path for Salt where to look for user commands. If you don't put it in the default folder, then you have to tell it APL where to find it. Although we are planning on making that automatic too. And a little warning about this this lower box. You don't have to use it. It's in order to be able to specify what modifiers are taken, but you can also do all the processing of what goes on the line after the command manually. It's totally up to whoever writes the user command.
So why don't you create a time command that just displays the time?
You can do that. So if we make a user command like this,
okay, that's it.
Done. So it opens up the editor like this, and so all user commands internally should have these 3 functions at least. They can have more, but the list is what comes out when you ask for the list of user commands in the system. Run is the actual user command when you
run the command,
and help is what gets called when you use question marks. And there are lots of things that can be done. They're not going to go through everything, but you can of course say like that.
That's going to be the date, but that's okay.
Yeah. Doesn't matter. We save this and
call it time and put it there.
Well, I can put it there.
Just put it. Okay, so now
it's
we should
automatically rebuilding user command, so we don't really have to do that.
Now we have a time user command.
New user command. So the idea is that that's what you saw. How can you do uload time? So this loads any user command you want to see how it's actually done. You can write back at uload, and then it creates a namespace in your current workspace. You can just open that up and see what the source code looks like. So the idea here is pretty simple. You create a namespace.
Modify it. Change squat.ts. Put 456 as index there. Okay. Save it.
So
okay. Now if we do time again, this time we're only going to get the time.
So the idea is if you are not using Windows for whatever reason, then you just have to have a namespace that contains these 3 functions. That's all, basically. No, user commands are there on the Linux.
Yeah, on the Mac.
There are some user commands that are not applicable to Linux. So for example, those that are directly have to do with Windows GUI, like the caption. You can't do that on the Linux. There is no one. And unew happens to use Windows WC, and so you can definitely create new user commands on the Linux, but you cannot use unew to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I can add to that there's been a change over the last few years where this system object, quad SE, was originally something that we only really provided on Windows because it was used by the Windows GUI itself. In the last few years, as part of this drive to make everything the same on all platforms, we now populate quad SE with at least the SALT infrastructure on all platforms.
Okay.
Anything else? Oh, good.